What time is it? It's an interesting question. When you ask what time it is, you're not normally saying it's 6:24 in the afternoon. What you're saying is, what are we supposed to be doing right now? When class starts, it's right at 6. It's like class starts then. What should I be doing? Or maybe asking in a greater sense, what season are you in? If you're in the season of raising kids, then that's kind of what your life looks like right now, or the season of your career. Those are questions that we're not asking the physical time, but what should we be doing? Why do we have time to do anything? Why are we here? And Ecclesiastes leans into that. The preacher, as he's called, who sounds a whole lot like King Solomon, wants us to understand like there's a greater meaning of life. And in his contemplations, he contemplates what God has done, specifically saying that God gives to man to reveal himself. Those gifts that he gives are, at least in this passage, threefold, saying that he gives time, that he gives work, and that he gives tests. And these ideas are cyclical, as was already talked about with Taylor's sermon, that the ideas bounce back and forth. And so some of the verses that we'll read will jump back and forth as we refer to them. But overall, I hope you catch that those themes of how God gives these things to reveal himself. First, we start in verse 1. The preacher writes, "To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under the sun." He then follows this with 14 different lines of all the things that happen in the world. And to be clear, this is saying that God gives time to reveal himself, gives time to reveal his beauty. Not just the things that happen in the world, but time itself, that we have space. There is a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to harvest. And it goes on. And that all of these are God's common grace. That is, in theological terms, a grace that's given or a gift that's given to everybody, Christian and non-Christian alike. It would be like in a household. When you have kids, they all get certain things. They all get clothes, a place to stay, food to eat. That's a common grace. And while it might not feel like a gift because the government requires those things, it is a gift of the parents that says all my kids get these things, as opposed to a unique grace, which might be a specific toy for a child. Time is a common grace that he gives. And you'll notice what's interesting about this list is not all these things are good. Some of them are evil, are hatred, death. They're aspects of the fall, which is tragic, but yet it's still part of what God has given us, a time to recognize these things. You can see that in verse 11, he highlights this idea when he says, he has made everything beautiful in time. The truth of it is, life isn't always beautiful right now, that there is a time in the future where everything will be made right and clean and good again. And right now, we don't live in that world. There's a time for both the good and bad. But it's part of how God has chosen to reveal himself. He's chosen to say that he's giving us time to show his beauty. Consider a movie. When you go to a movie, what makes you walk out of the theater saying, that was a really satisfying movie? That was a great movie. Well, it's not always the characters or the humor or the comic relief. It's the conclusion of the matter. It's saying it was satisfying because there was a problem. Think of the movie Lion King. If you tried to take out like the death of Mufasa, it would be a kind of mediocre movie where someone becomes king after his father. You need the problem in order to recognize the beauty of that thing. Or think of Dumbo, who had big ears. If you take away his big ears, you have no plot line anymore, no discovery of why he could fly or all those ideas. Even Dora the Explorer, a children's show, encourages us to give problems to its toddler audience, saying, here are the problems that we can overcome. So when we get to the end, we could say we did it. There's a excitement at the end because of the problems. Likewise, God has allowed a world where there's sin. And that's a hard reality. Right after Adam and Eve sinned, God could have sent the Messiah right then and there. Why did he choose to wait 4,000 years of history before sending the Messiah, and even more before the end of all things? It seems like that gift is partly there for us to understand who he is in the contrast of the ugliness. And while this point points us to the beauty of God, that he gives time to reveal his beauty, this also has a practical application for us, that in different circumstances, it's appropriate for us to respond to what time it is or where we're at. When we go to a funeral, I've seen too often where we've encouraged people too quickly to say, it's okay, you don't need to cry, that person will be in heaven one day. And while that's theologically true, it also isn't always appropriate. It's sometimes okay to let somebody grieve. That's part of the process of human life. On the other side, the idea of somebody giving birth is a celebration to be had. And it's something that we might be tired of going to gender reveal parties, but there's something to be said of the joy of celebrating life, even as I look forward to welcoming a new one in the world about 2 weeks from now. That God gives us time to reveal his beauty. And second, he gives work to reveal our purpose. We see this start to develop in verse 9 through 13, the preacher writes. What profit has the worker from which he labors? I have seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do what is good, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of his labor. It is the gift of God. It states it plainly there that God gives work to reveal our purpose, and that is a gift from God. Why does he give this work? Verse 10 earlier answered it. It said, I have seen the God-given task that he gives work so that people would be occupied. And that idea of occupied can sound a little patronizing or a little pacifying, like let's just give them something to do. But I would want to encourage it maybe in this light. I've worked in youth ministry in a long time, and put yourself at the end of a youth night. The room is buzzing with people laughing. There's a little bit of energy left in the room, and people are hanging around talking. But there's also crumbs on the floor, and the trash cans are full, and the chairs need to be put back in place. You could think as a leader, hey, I'll just let the kids have fun, let them relax. This is for them, and give them a ministry of nothing, no work. But what happens in reality is that when somebody doesn't have work to do, they feel purposeless. They don't have a meaning. They don't have a reason why they're there. They feel devalued. Why do I even show up? So instead, you walk over to them with trash bags and a vacuum cleaner and say, here, do this. And it can be easy to pass off like you're just kind of getting them to do the work, but you can instead say, you doing this work matters. Because when the room is clean, the next group can come in and not have to worry about the previous thing, but people can come in and feel welcome. Suddenly, all those kids don't feel purposeless. They actually see the meaning of why they need to clean the room, of how it welcomes people into the church and maybe even gives them time to build relationships. Those are critical matters, and all of a sudden you've turned them from being purposeless to having a meaningful purpose. Likewise, God has given work not for his own whatever, for his own purpose. It's for us. It's a gift. And yes, work is a part of the fall in some regard where there's difficulty in the work. But even in Genesis 1 and 2, God gave mankind work to do, name the animals and tend the garden. That was part of God's original plan, to give work to discover our purpose. Also, it's not just discover our purpose here in this life, because once you clean the table and put away the chairs, you ask yourself, why does that matter? And then when you answer that question, you ask, why does that matter? And eventually you get to that longing of, why does anything matter? And that's what verse 11 gets at, where he says that everything was made beautiful in this time, which we've already talked about, and he has set eternity in our hearts. What that means is that part of when we engage in the work of normal day life, it's begging the question of, why does this matter? The work that God has given us doesn't just speak to our purpose here, but it speaks to our ultimate purpose, that, and apart from God, the work that we do doesn't ultimately matter. It says that except nobody is able to understand the work that God has done from beginning to end. It's like we're stuck in a mural, a beautiful painting that extends eternally in both directions, but we are stuck in our little 2D sliver of it. We can see what happens before us and what happens after us, but what goes on outside of that is only God's realm. So part of why God gives us work is to reveal his purpose, to reveal that there's something greater and outside of ourselves that apart from giving us work, we wouldn't understand. So God gives us time and gives us work to reveal his beauty and our purpose. And at last, he gives tests. And this is probably one of the hardest points, because he gives tests to reveal our depravity. Verses 16 to 18, he writes, moreover, I saw under the sun, in the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of righteousness, iniquity was there. I said in my heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. I said in my heart, concerning the condition of men, God tests them, that they may see that they are themselves like animals. This is in stark contrast to the beginning. Earlier, when it said that there's a time and place for everything, it's everything under heaven, which seems to be God's realm or how God has chosen to give things. And here, this is under the sun. This is life without God or left on our own devices. And this is kind of like the world that we live in right now. In the places where we expect righteousness and goodness to happen, we see judgment, see wickedness instead. You think all the way over to our courthouses, how many laws do we have in our judicial system that are set up to keep people from being wicked or to try to get their own gain? Do we have justice yet? No. Those laws are there because people are evil. Think about politicians. They're some of the most known for greedy, underhanded gain, to make backhanded deals to get their own way. We know that they're lying by their mouths moving. And it's not much better in the church. The church has some of the most notorious pastors and church leaders who have scandals of their own. And it's the problem of evil. Why does God allow for this to happen? And it seems like part of the answer is that he gives us tests so that we ourselves realize our depravity. This isn't a test for God. God already knows our state. It's kind of like in a teacher classroom for elementary students. The teacher doesn't ask what's 5 plus 9 so that she can learn what the answer is. It's rather so the students can think about it and understand more from the question. The test that God has given is this time. So when we ask, why does evil exist in the world? I think we forget that part of it is because God is merciful and graceful. How does that go together? Well, if we want God to judge evil, we must have him judge all of it, not just a little bit of it. And if that's the case, then he has to judge you and me, because we're found wanting him. Like there's a level of our own hearts that we overlook, that when we want him to judge evil, it's always other people as opposed to ourselves. That judgment is real, and it makes us, as what the passage says, like animals. Now, while theologically it's not exactly true that there's a difference between man and animals, right? Man was made in the image of God. Animals do not go to heaven. There's a distinction. But here, when humans sin, we act no better than animals. We're savagery. This goes all the way back to Genesis 4, when Cain was about to kill Abel. God stops Cain and says, sin is crouching at the door. It's like an animal that wants to have you, but you need to act like an image bearer of God and rule over it instead. Or think of King Nebuchadnezzar. When he spoke in pride, God made him like an animal, like an ox, so that he would look outside just like he was on the inside. Sin is a real reality, and part of why God gives us this so much time in this work is to reveal in ourselves our own self-depravity. We may not like that, but apart from that, we don't know who God is. Part of the gift that he gives us is time to realize how great he is in contrast to who we are. He gives us work so that we might be tested, so that it might reveal to us how we fall short of his ultimate standard. The problem of evil is not something that can be simply solved. It's like, again, we're stuck in the middle, not looking both ways. And there's a limitation to our understanding of that, we have to admit. But ultimately, we should recognize that God is gracious to give these gifts. Specifically, that God gives to man so that it might reveal himself. He gives us time so that we might experience all of the good and bad in life that points to him. He gives us work so we can find both our purpose now in life and also points to our eternal purpose that we need him. And last, he gives tests so that it might reveal our depravity, recognizing that we need him. And the most beautiful part about it is he doesn't just give us time to realize our depravity. He also gives us more time to repent, be saved, and know him. So we should treasure the gifts that God gives us that reveals himself.